Let's talk a little bit about NWSL preseason because we've absolutely been doing that alongside everything else, right? The Title IX stuff that we've been doing, any of the United States women's national team news that we've been covering. NWSL preseason absolutely in full swing. We've done team by team previews for all 12 clubs. Please check them out as they drop. But there's also been a couple preseason matches for some of these teams that we maybe should talk about a little bit. Now, these are preseason scrimmages. So all of them, with really the exception of one, weren't typically, accessible in terms of being able to watch, right? If you're a fan and you're trying to look for preseason matches. But let's take a
That
look.
was me as a fan. I was like, where can I
Where
watch?
can you find them,
I
right?
want to watch all of these, and I was sad I couldn't.
We're thirsty
Honestly.
for soccer, honestly, for NWSL soccer. We miss it. Let's take a look at maybe some of these results real quick. Kansas City Current, Orlando Pride actually meeting up for a scrimmage, played out to a 0-0 draw. Kansas City Current against Washington Spirit. The Current taking that one over the reigning champions, winning 6-0 in that one. And then there's other teams that will have some other matches going on. But I want to talk about right now about games that had fixtures. When you're looking at maybe just these couple games right here, Lisa, the KC Current matches against Pride and Washington Spirit, what's standing out to you here?
Well, first of all, the KC Current winning over Washington Spirit 6-0. I think that is a pretty fun stat, a fun first match for them to have.
It's a real preseason scoreline.
Yeah, preseason scoreline. And then to go back to back and Kansas City to tie against Orlando Pride. Like, like the individual scores of each of those are interesting, but when you throw them together, the fact that Kansas City dominated against reigning NWSL champions Washington Spirit 6-0 and then tied to Orlando Pride, which is, as we said in our preview, they're going through a bit of a rebrand, a restructuring this year as Orlando Pride, and the fact that Kansas City could do that, I'm pretty impressed. I'm pretty surprised about what's happening here. Intrigued. I'm intrigued, and that's why, I wish I could have watched these, and I wish I could have really seen everything that happened on the pitch without just reading lineups and reading recaps. I like that Kansas City is playing games, right? So that's the other thing. When we look at all of these preseason scrimmages and what's happening, teams that are playing, that's great. You should be playing. This is your preseason. You're about to start Challenge Cup. You're about to go against 2 new expansion clubs. Depending on how you did in the last 2021 season, you're probably looking to improve or at least maintain that consistency. So you need to be playing matches. You need to be playing scrimmages, games against outside competition. Now, playing against collegiate programs, that's big, and that's something, and that's doing something. As a former collegiate player, we played against the Red Stars in Wisconsin. We played against the Red Stars in our preseason and in the spring season. So it helps, but I think as a college player, I got more amped for that than they were, just because I was like, I'm going against the pros. Yeah. Let's see what Kristen Press can do to me. Destroy me every time for anyone that's curious. But then to see that these clubs are going out of their way, Kansas City to play Washington, to play Orlando, that's really promising, I think, to see that happening. When you saw these, Sandra, what did you like? Did you like that Houston went to Mexico? They really found some outside competition.
Listen, I loved that. We chatted a little bit about that and reacted to it a little bit on socials. Houston Dash and head coach Jim Clarkson are really continuing a little bit of a tradition here, right? Mm-hmm. This is not Houston's first rodeo in terms of jumping into inter-scrimmage competition with Liga MX Femenil teams, right? So there have been moments in the past where Liga MX Femenil teams have, come to Houston and played, and Houston jumping into Mexico and doing that. And they went a little further south into Mexico. They actually faced off against Pumas Femenil for this preseason scrimmage, which is they're based out of Mexico City. So heading a little further south, right, into the country, which I think is going to give a little bit of a different experience, right, for this Houston Dash team in their preseason. They're going to be the only team that sort of has this type of event that can, yes, also that's going to have training, that's going to have a game, or that had a game attached to it, but also have this sort of team camaraderie kind of experience. So this sort of team building experience to sort of have with them adjacent to all of this stuff that they're doing in preseason, I think is going to be huge for the Dash. Honestly, when we're sort of looking at them towards the end of things overall, how they sort of tackle their regular season,
Yeah.
they end up walking away with a win, right? And it absolutely had some preseason vibes to it. This was the game that we were alluding to. We were talking about not a ton of these preseason games were available to watch, but Houston Dash made this one available. There was a live stream
Yeah.
that they were able to connect with a feed out there in Mexico and be able to put up on their website, and people were able to take a look at that. So largely scoreless for the most part, majority of the game, but a late game winner for Houston Dash. And I liked that. I liked seeing these two sides go together. I was left with the same impression that I always have. I would love to see more
Yeah.
preseason, like, because it's NWSL preseason, but Liga MX Femenil is in season. So it's like this kind of interest, like it's an opportunity, I think, for both of these leagues to kind of
Yeah.
get in there and sort of go toe to toe, right? So it was really interesting to sort of see. You definitely saw some, what I think you consider kind of like a Dash B side a little bit
Mhm.
in terms of the lineup, right? Uh,
Yeah.
going up against maybe some typical starters of Pumas Femenil. So
Yeah.
it was
Do you think, sorry if word vomit question here, do you think that James Clarkson being a coach at Washington or at Houston now for a few years and kind of getting the lay of the land gives him a leg up to get some of these preseason roster scrimmages like on the books early
Oh
on?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Clarkson's he's been involved in the Houston franchise for a long time. He was with
Or
For Youth Academy specifically on on the Dynamo and Dash side of things. So he's been with the franchise for a little while before even going into that head coaching role, right? And now he's got 4 seasons as a head coach
Mhm.
under his belt with this team. But a lot of those youth development ties, you reach out to other areas, right? So he's got some connections, I'm sure, deep on the Mexico side of things when it comes to being able to sit down, meet with people, have meetings, and discuss about how to get games going in action that could benefit both clubs here. There could be a mutually beneficial thing. And I think probably Clarkson, more than any other head coach in the league, understands and respects the value of that, in terms of being able to look right next door and say, hey, there's actually a whole other country right next door with a fully professionalized league that we should start engaging with a little bit more when it comes to expanding a club competition. So as of now, Houston are the only franchise that can say that they have sort of met, Mexico and Liga Mex Femenil kind of halfway and sort of have, these kind of matches. So whether they're in regular season type scrimmages or preseason scrimmages, I'm a big fan of them. I would love to see the continuation of this, and honestly, the involvement of it, and maybe see some other teams get involved into the mix of things as well.
Yeah, I'm excited about this, but this is just a taste. That's like what the best part is, that it is preseason and it is a taste. And we're giving a lot of credit. Well, I'm giving a lot of credit to like these teams for getting these scrimmages and getting
Mhm.
these matches on the calendar because it's so necessary. But it's interesting that there also are teams that haven't announced preseason scrimmages.
No, not yet, but they'll be coming up. I mean, I know there's clubs
Yeah.
that like you mentioned, there's clubs that go against collegiate side. You
Mhm.
speaking of personal experience about that, haven't been with Marquette, but Racing Louisville, right, gonna face off against some opponents that on the NCAA side of things. So will North Carolina Courage. That's something that's not unfamiliar with them, right? Being in the same backyard as a UNC, as a Duke, they'll likely see some scrimmage or closed door competitions there. Portland, though, I think it's important to maybe highlight here, they're bringing back their preseason tournament. Portland typically hosted a spring invitational during preseason, which they would host 2 other NWSL sides and the United States U23 women's national team, all in Portland. And obviously, the brakes were pumped on that in light of the pandemic. It was one of the first things to actually get suspended and canceled back in 2020, and then we really didn't see, the comeback of that. But here we are in 2022. They're going to have another spring invitational. It's going to be taking place March 5th through the 11th. This time at Providence Park, and before in the past, it's taking place at University of Portland. So it's going to be back at Providence Park, and it's going to be the return of the Red Stars, who have participated in every single one of these spring tournaments since their beginning. And then it's going to include OL Reign, and it's once again going to include the U23 team. So round robin style for those teams to sort of get some preseason matches in ahead of Challenge Cup. So I'm sure we'll maybe be able to take in a couple matches there, hopefully, with the resources at Portland, and maybe we'll get to see some preseason scrimmages on that end. But with these matches, some of them already taking place and some of them which will soon take place, that means with the new month came some new roster updates. And we're going to go through some of these because as we were doing our team by team previews for NWSL, we were going through these preseason rosters, going through them by position, seeing which players had made this initial preseason rosters. And some of these rosters were huge, right, Lisa? We're talking like 36, 38 some players, and some of them were a little lower. So maybe with a new month, with this first round of cuts in preseason, there might not be a ton for some teams. Well, on other teams, there might have been a significant change, right? So maybe let's start right in order here. You want to maybe hit me with some interesting bullet points what we're looking at for Angel City FC. They listed 25 previously, but now 26. What's going on here with Angel City?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about all of these rosters, and we did dive so deep into them when we did our team by team preview, but now that these official rosters are out, it's so interesting to look at the changes that happened. I mean, one of the biggest for Angel City that has been talked about before, but no Julie Ertz, who was traded from Chicago in the offseason. She wasn't listed on their initial roster back in early February, and she's not listed on this one. It did come out. Angel City spokesperson reported to the Equalizer that she is not planning on playing throughout the 2022 season, but that was kind of it. That's about the extent of the information we have on Julie Ertz. If she does come back to play, change her mind, whatever circumstances change for 2022, Angel City still has her rights. So she is still with Angel City. But otherwise, I mean, not too many changes, just adding one player to their roster listed now, but still three goalkeepers, which I think is the biggest change when looking at all of these rosters and kind of overviewing them is the goalkeepers. A lot of teams had 4, even 5, and now they're down to 3, which is much more typical and normal. Still, midfielders being probably the largest number when you look at the overall of all of these 12 clubs and their rosters that they put out. Midfielders are probably the biggest. So that's Angel City, not too many changes, but Chicago Red Stars, another roster that started with 37 in early February and now only has 33 players listed. Just a little bit of changes happening amongst them. I mean, mostly we saw roster numbers drop for these clubs. There were a few clubs that actually added players. OL Reign and Orlando Pride, they added each a player. Chicago, they lost 4. San Diego, they lost 6. And Washington Spirit, the club that had the most number of players, 38 players originally listed on the roster. Now they only have 30. So that was a big difference. Still 4 goalkeepers for Washington Spirit, but a lot of player changes happening. Even like Kumi Yokiyama, who was traded to Gotham, that had happened before. But yeah, just 30 players, which is still a lot. That's still a lot of players considering how many they're allowed to play. And for Racing Louisville, they have the lowest, the shortest roster, the lowest number of players with 24 listed on their preseason roster ahead of the Challenge Cup that's to come. But a lot of changes, a lot of players coming in and out of these rosters.
Yeah, Challenge Cup is coming up. It's going to be kicking off on March 18th. So I think with this first round, right, of cuts to the preseason roster, this is a little bit of a narrowing down. This is a little bit of a whittling down. Probably, we're going to see a different mix of players involved in some of these Challenge Cup games, outside of some of the preseason scrimmages that we've been talking a little bit about already. This is going to be the first kind of crack at NWSL versus NWSL type of competition. So seeing this kind of this early March 1st kind of, preseason cut, it just sort of feels like, okay, now this is like the group that is going to be continuing to sort of try to, make certain strides together as
Yeah.
something like the Challenge Cup looms closer, because we're talking about at this point roughly 2 weeks or so
Yeah.
away. So the little things in between these rosters, right? I think I love hearing the things that you were mentioning right now between some of these cuts on the player rosters, but the little things that stand out to me are the things that I like to like kind of fixate on and pay attention to. But like even with you mentioning with Gotham about how like they had like similar to Washington, that they had a ton of players and now they kind of narrowed
Yeah.
it down to just 30, which is still technically a lot, right? There's going to have to be another round of cuts there to sort of meet the player cap side of things. But the little things like, the Elizabeth Eddy not being a defender, listed as a
Yes.
defender, but being listed as a midfielder, right? Like the positional things are always
There was
very
a lot of
intriguing.
positional changes. I mean, you mentioned Elizabeth Eddy, Brie Vasali, originally listed as a forward for Houston. Now she's a midfielder. Haley Mace for Kansas City, originally a midfielder, now as a defender. Elizabeth Eddy, as you mentioned. So those changes are so interesting. And is it because of the new coaches? Is it because of the other personnel? And of course, I mean, you can be listed as a defender and start as a striker every game once the season comes around. But it's just interesting to see kind of how these coaches categorize the players that they have on their team.